Welcome back to Blatantly Honest with Makaila Nichols. On today's episode, I sat down with Shenea Booth, also known as Shayna Stiletto. She's a two-time world champion gold medalist in acrobatic gymnastics, a USA Gymnastics Hall of Fame member, World Acrobatics Society inductee, and she was the first ever African-American female soloist to play a lead character in a Cirque Du Soleil production. She was also featured in RAINN's Don't Stay Quiet campaign. Shenea is a survivor of sexual violence from her former gymnastics coach David Reiakvam, who was convicted in 2012 for decades-long crimes against young athletes. She's currently seeking to hold the USA Gymnastics accountable for the crimes inflicted upon her. She's part of a new wave in the Me Too movement in the Circus Arts world. It's an honor to have you on the show. When did you begin your career in acrobatics? I'm sure you were young.
Yes, I was really young, but I wasn't as young as people usually are when they start gymnastics. I always tell this story that my first coach that found me, that like scouted me and saw me, told my parents, she's a little bit old, but we'll take her anyway.
You're kidding.
And I was 8 at the time.
Oh.
Yeah, so I had kind of a late start because, many gymnasts or acro gymnasts started around, like 4 or 5 years old. So.
I cannot imagine starting like a career at 4 or 5 years old, like let alone 8. Like what?
I know. At a certain point, when you start saying how many years you've done something, people like start like thinking like, well, how old are you? And it's like, I started when I was really young.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better just than like I started at this age, because then you're like, whoa, it puts things into perspective. I'm like, what was I even doing when I was there? I was probably like picking my nose like in class or something.
Still don't even know sometimes, like, even though like I coach and I teach like and I'm teaching like younger at this moment right now too, but most of the people and like artists and stuff that I teach are older, but sometimes you forget and like I'll lapse and I'll think like if I'm teaching someone that's younger, I'm like, how do they do it?
Yeah.
So and like how did they do that with me, because I was a very like shy little girl, and I was very much to myself, and I honestly don't know how they pulled so much out of me. I really don't, because I'm so introverted and I really love to read, and I ended up being like very active, but I was very much in my head about acrobatics when I was being coached, and I really they really had to, that was some mentoring, that was some guiding.
I'm sure. So how was that whole experience? Like you're 8 years old, like you probably don't even know what you want, like ever, because who would at that age? I mean, did you think this was going to be a career that early on?
No, I didn't. I didn't think it was going to be a career, but I definitely was like so in love with it, like from the beginning. So there was like no goading me into things. Like I didn't have to be like, oh, we're going to get you this so that you go to practice, or, like all these other things that like, parents have to do to encourage some of their kids
Yeah.
into sports. It was very much me. Like they asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said yeah, and I loved it from the beginning. So it was just always something that like felt like second nature, was like really like in my soul and my spirit. But I never thought it was going to be a career until I got like a bit older, and I was around, like I had the right coaches and the right people kind of like around me that showed me like, oh, there's also circus, and this is also, kind of like a pathway that you can take, and you don't really ever have to stop, and it can change, and you can develop and grow and everything. So there was like, thankfully I really had that. But I think the bigger thing about acrobatic gymnastics is that it's a non-Olympic sport. So we are in some ways kind of like, I don't know, we don't have like the same, people didn't see the same future for us. So it's good that you can really see the future for yourself, because people think like, oh, well, it's not Olympic, like you're going to transition into something else. And, we were always like, no. So I've always had people kind of like in that conversation about it. So it was always something that was strange and unique. And so just thinking afterwards, like, oh, you can be circus, like for me, it wasn't like, oh, that's like weird or unbelievable. It was like, oh, well, people already think I do something that's really kind of like off the norm, and that you can't take further, and that you have to stop it. So it was like good preparation for me, because we were always very like solid, like, no, we're not going to do anything else. And we're not retiring and going into anything else. Like, this is what we do. So.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So I guess your career kind of began and then in circus. Is that correct?
Yes, I transitioned into circus. So I competed until 2004 in acrobatic gymnastics, and I did the whole gambit. I did world championships several times. I did world games. I went to national championships. It's all the same pipeline. The only thing that we don't do is we don't go to the Olympics. So I was kind of like an honorary Olympian. I did the Olympic tour though in 2004 because all of my close friends went to the Olympics because they were all in Olympic sports. So we were included. Me and my former partner. It was the first time in history they included acrobatic gymnastics in the Olympic tour. So I actually got all of that, which is funny how life works out in so many different ways. I got like the experience without being an Olympian in a way. So it was really cool. And after I retired, that's when I started performing and started to do shows. I started to do circus and do shows before I stopped competing. That was like to take care of like cost and then just to kind of get like our feet wet, and we would work and do things that we could to make money because it's a very expensive sport. So that was like my entryway into it as well. So I started working just like with so many different companies. I've been scouted by Cirque Du Soleil since I was about 14. That was back when they hired minors to do their touring shows. They don't do that anymore, so you can't start until you're about 18. In other countries, I think it's a little bit. It might not be 18 everywhere, but I'm pretty sure it's 18 now everywhere. But so that was one thing that I could have even started sooner. So it kind of like opened me up into this whole world, and circus is so vast, and the Cirque world, you know, there's so many different like tunnels and things you can weave into with taking that kind of career.
Definitely. That's incredible. I've always been so fascinated with Cirque, like circus and, just performance. Like I'm literally 5'11", so my body could never do anything. Like I'm just tall and awkward, like it just doesn't work. But I really admire watching everyone else do it because I'm like, if I could do that, it would be so cool. So I just to put it out there.
You can, because I want to tell you, my base in acrobatic gymnastics was 6'5", and yes, he was 6'5", and then my friends that did rhythmic, that's what you would have been perfect for. They're like all 5'9" and above. So it's just the discipline.
So there's hope.
There is hope. That means we're going to start you now.
Right? I think I missed that age cutoff. Good Lord, if he started when you were 8, I'm 22, so they'd be like, no, she's a grandma, she can't do it, like that can't. But
in circus or in gymnastics, everything.
yes. So I think like acrobatic and all that stuff, I think body image from the get-go. Because, growing up in the fashion world, I get how your body has to look a certain way and you have to be tiny and petite. How was your experience with body image?
Well, I have to say that I think I'm actually one of the luckier ones because it's a very difficult topic. Obviously, eating disorders and projecting unrealistic body expectations in our world, in the elite level athletic world, is really really high. And I have so many friends and so many colleagues where they're still dealing with those like body image issues even now. I would say that like I was lucky. I don't know why. I got a lot of other issues, but that one in particular didn't affect me so much. I mean, I did get things where I was shamed, of course, for being muscular. I got that a bit later on in my life as I kind of like evolved. I was incredibly tiny, but that suited the medium that was in, so I was lucky. But there was a lot of information out there in terms of people, trying to project onto you to be and look a certain way. I would say also too, just being a black acrobat, and that those were certain things in terms of body image that maybe I got just because I was always seen as like the muscular girl. I was never seen as the one that was like the flexible, graceful one. So I got that in that way. But I would say on the other end, in terms of dealing with anorexia or dealing with other eating disorders, I did not get those cues. But it is very deep, and it's something that stays with you throughout your life. I mean, I have friends that I competed with that they still suffer from body dysmorphia, body issues, even now as adults, and everything leads back to being in the sport and how people speak about you. And there's a lot of pressure. I'm not going to say that we didn't have a certain aesthetic and things that we were trying to accomplish, but I was around trainers that were much healthier and much more conscious, and never put that on me in terms of it being negative. It was always about being healthy, but a lot of my colleagues and gymnasts and acrobats did not get that same communication. So I think it's a very delicate balance. There's a lot in and around that conversation even happening right now that's never happened before. And I think that's very good and very healthy. My also to position on that for myself, there were just, again, there were things just like naturally for myself that I just didn't incur. I didn't have the growth spurt that I was waiting for. I didn't end up growing. But people are constantly speaking about your body. So would I say that I also too maybe have in some ways an over-identification with my body in some ways that, maybe like, a person that doesn't do sport would have? Absolutely. But for me, it's never been something that felt burdensome, but it definitely is, you have an awareness of your body at all times. And so I also love to see how the communities are starting to incorporate that stronger in terms of being mindful of how you take care of yourself and being conscious in and around that from a young age. So all that language being turned around and being used in a much more kind of like positive way. But it's very difficult, competing at that level and taking on all of those stresses is not easy. And it can definitely take over everything that you love about what you're doing. And I definitely identify with that.
Yeah. I'm sure. I know it's awful to think about, always being compared to someone else, or do I look like this, or do I fit the mold, and that's always the hardest part. I mean, just for anyone, and for even a lot of the younger kids trying to be something they're not. So I watched an interview you did with Jonathan Lee, and oh my gosh, he's amazing. Hello, if you're listening, hey, shout out. But Right, he's amazing. I saw that you talked a lot about discrimination that you faced in the circus industry. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it's not easy, and and going from one environment where I was always the only Black athlete in acrobatics, and then going and becoming a circus performer where I'm again the only Black circus performer in all of my contracts, has been a very difficult journey and path to navigate. I would say again that like the love for what I do has helped me to transcend so many of those things, but it's very real, right? And so even when we talk about like the body shaming and those issues too, for me in terms of like even that, it didn't so much just feel like body shaming, it just felt like you're shamed for who you completely are, because I'm never not Black and brown when I walk into a space. And so there has just been so many instances throughout my career where I've had to navigate so much racism, so much racial bias, so much inequitable treatment in terms of casting, in terms of show production, in terms of directing, in terms of artistic direction, where I'm never allowed to fully inhabit like who I want to be, and I'm consistently seen as limited. And again in this conversation too, people see you do very well, and they think like you haven't had those difficulties, that you've maybe been able to get above all of those things, and it's just absolutely not true. And so I've dealt with that a lot within the circus world too, where it's this environment where it's seemingly very international.
Seemingly.
But it's really, it's not, especially if you know how everybody looks underneath the makeup. And where the demographics of people are usually from. Most people don't realize, or they forget, in circus about 99% of artists are from one particular country group, are from Eastern Europe. And everything is kind of goaded in and around that. So, people will just consistently say, like, I just didn't see you in that role, or, you're not really the right look for the role, you're not really like the right fit. And so you're consistently always trying to show them that their role can be for anybody. It can be for, I have the skill, I have the talent, I have the capacity. So you're constantly kind of like vouching for yourself. And so in the circus world, I can't even believe that we're having these conversations, honestly. I thought that it would never, ever, ever happen where the conversation in and around race and discrimination ever hit circus, because the lack of diversity in circus is so glaring. I can count it on my hands when I've worked with another Black circus performer in a show in my 16-year career. You know, I'm usually the first Black circus performer anybody has ever met, and you know, I'm usually the first circus performer a lot of people have met, obviously, but it goes on a deeper level. And even when I'm doing the shows, I'm usually the first Black artist that the directors have worked with, that the producers have worked with, that the choreographers have worked with, that the makeup artists have worked with, that the costume designers have worked with. And that's everywhere you go. You know, I'm consistently in spaces where clients, you know, tell producers and tell, you know, companies, we don't want to hire any artists of color. We only want white artists. And a lot of things, when I tell people, they think that I'm talking about a long time ago. And I always tell them, like, no.
I'm sure.
Wow, that just happened yesterday. That just happened in my last contract. You know, even right now too, there's, you know, of course the conversation is so wide open now, and people are really trying to band together and do their due diligence. But I mean, I'm reminding everyone, like, you know, I'm still experiencing bias and things like that even right now. It's not like going to just go away just because we finally started to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just start, and we need to continue because we have so far to go in this environment. I mean, you know, the racism I've experienced, you know, like the N word is still said, you know, in the backstage in the shows that I do. Yeah, and
that's, oh my God, that's disgusting. That's just.
It's a very sad reality, and people ask, you know, like, how do you navigate all those things? It's like, well, the thing is that I've been in those spaces for so many years, and like I said, because I grew up in them when I was an acrobat, when I was competing, I got used to that. You get used to it on a certain level of navigating.
You should never get used to that.
Yeah. And you don't, you know, you don't get used to it, but you get used to being able to move in and around it. So everything I think is a negotiation. When you are a BIPOC artist, which is, you know, kind of like the new acronym or whatever that we're all using too. It's something that I'm even kind of getting used to, and I go back and forth kind of with using that or not, because some aspect of that to me still feels a little bit dehumanizing. For me, it's very important to remember who we're speaking about. We're speaking about Black and brown bodies. I'm a Black woman, African American woman, Black woman, you know, so there is, and I understand the intention behind those things. It's, you know, getting everybody together and helping us all identify and stuff as a group. But, you know, there's just so much hierarchy in the circus world, and there's just been so little attention put on that aspect that it has felt just so isolating for all of us, and the fact that us Black performers too never really get to meet each other or see each other because we're never put in the same shows, and, you know, just kind of how that has, I think, probably nullified us in a lot of ways too, because we can't really be unified because you don't get put in the shows with anybody that looks like you. So you're just constantly just kind of like on your own, and, you know, even if you are connected to them, you're not doing your 6-month or year tours with those same artists that are of color that share your experiences. So a lot of it is me going into places where you're just so alien. It really feels like you're from not even like a different country, but like a completely different planet.
I can't imagine.
A Black artist, or, you know, and yeah, you feel even alienish, to not even put it lightly, and it's not a soft conversation. You know, I know a lot of people like to use certain words too, even like bias and things like that, and I'm like, it's literally just flat out racism. It's just
yeah.
You know, it's like, let's not tiptoe around it. Like, you know,
let's just say what it is.
Let's just say what it is. The conversations and things and the treatments have been just so off the charts. So many, you know, experiences and contracts that I've had. It would just, again, keep your mouth open, where you're like, it's 2020. Like,
yeah, and the fact that this is still happening is just,
yeah. It's disheartening. But like I said, I think it's a miracle that this is all happening, and that the conversation is opened up and like moving forward. You know, I think a lot of us are kind of exhausted too, because we're trying to be there as much as possible and open ourselves up and speak about everything in our experiences. And everyone's, it's not that, again, too, I tell everyone, it's not like I wasn't speaking about these things before. We didn't just start telling everybody that there's racism in circus. I've spoken with artists that I'm working with all the time. We would have experiences where they'd be like, I have no idea why they're treating you like that in the show. And I would tell them, oh, well, that's what racism is.
Or like, just so you know, like, this has been happening.
Like, that's normal and that's typical. Like, it's totally textbook, and they would just be like, wow. And I've had beautiful allies within my career too. Like, there's obviously artists that I'm having those conversations with. Like, I wouldn't be having them with them if they weren't allies. But you also see that too. Even the best of allies will say like, well, it could be this, or it could be that, or maybe it's this. And so it's always this like very delicate balance where you're like, no. Like, we can't. I know it's hard to imagine that it's just basically the fact that I'm brown, but that's really all it comes down to. So I've had a lot of amazing conversations over my career of, everyone calls it like the exhaustive, like, like racial education, but it's also, like I said, it's something that I've been doing since I'm a little girl. Like, I've been traveling to Ukraine and Eastern Europe and Russia since I was little. So I've been in spaces where, I've been in very tiny villages where, people like just want to touch us, because it's, it's that out there for them in their lives. And so there's elements of that too that I think growing up like that, like, it didn't make me feel like anybody was my enemy. It just felt like more of like curiosity. Obviously, like, later on you start to see like, oh, that's why I didn't get those experiences. That's why it's been so hard. That's what those things meant. I shouldn't have made light of that, and I did. You get into experiences where people say like, we know it's that, but please don't bring it up because we love you, and you're never going to get through that door if you go there. It's never going to work for you. So don't say that thing. Don't say it. Just keep your job, keep your career, hope that it'll come back around again. And so, it's been difficult. There's been experiences that I should have done much better, but people have projected that I wasn't up for the job, that I didn't do well, after they, gave me the job. and I did everything that I could to do well. And, it's like, how did I go from being so masterful to being so under par, like, overnight? Like, that's strange.
Yeah, something doesn't add up there.
I just don't really get it. And it's all those things that, like, my older Black family members told me when I was young, and I didn't really, get it. I didn't really understand when they were saying those things. And I even tell people, it took me a long time to realize I was showing up Black everywhere. Like, it really did. And many times I would, blame it on myself, and that's what we do too. We say like, oh, well, it's my personality, and maybe they just didn't like me, and maybe I just said the wrong thing, or maybe I just didn't, all sorts of things. You just exhaust yourself, and then you download the fact that it has nothing to do with anything that you could have done to make that situation different. They just cannot see you beyond this. They just can't.
That's what's wrong with society. It's just, and I'm thankful to have so many friends, and I'm learning myself. I'm learning to be more. It's a learning process, and it's just some things. It's if you don't experience it directly, it's hard. And I'm like, and having these conversations is so important, so valuable, because it's like people need to wake up. And I'm sure you've dealt with that your whole life, of like, you're questioning yourself and your talent, and like, clearly you're amazing at what you do. Like, look at what you've accomplished, and the fact that you have to sit back and be like, well, is it me, is it this? And then it's just it blows my mind. So
yeah, and it's got to learning, and I'm biracial. My mom is white, and so that's also been something to see the world and see my experiences through my mom's eyes. Obviously, like, being in a family where you're loved by everybody, like, that looks like everybody, that's also, makes a very big special difference. And then it's also, sometimes we're re-educating my mom still, where she's like, nobody would ever see my child in that way or treat them. My mom's just like, they would never.
yeah.
Yeah, Mom,
Yeah.
she's like, but you're so beautiful, and and we're like, Mom, we know, there's 5 of us, so it's a very delicate thing, or even sometimes my mom it's hard for her. So that's why I always tell everyone, like, that also has increased even my overall compassion in those spaces of seeing that people don't know or don't think that, because they're like, well, I love how I love. I know how I love, and I know what I feel, and I know it to be true, and I would never. And so, it's always a nice reflection. But, sometimes with my mom, even still too, she's like, everyone just loves you. They love you like I do, and nobody would ever. And so,
it's nice that you think that, Mom. Like,
no, Mom, and I've had a lot of experiences in my life too, even with my mom, where, people don't think that I'm with my mom. They don't think that's my mom. And, even as an adult, my mom will, go into certain places, say my daughter's coming, and she'll be coming up behind me, and people have ID'd me and not let me go into spaces that my mom is waiting for me in. And, and having to navigate that because my mom will have to, vouch for me. And so how infantilizing that is as well, when you have to have people constantly like vouching for you as an adult. You're an adult, and that's my mom, but my name is on the list, like my name is on the list. Why do you have to go and ask? And so, so it happens. It happens just even with families. So you're just constantly figuring out how to have those conversations. And so, yeah, like I said, I've been having conversations in and around my family for a long time. So, we all exhaust each other.
Hey, you know what? Oh, wow. So aside from that, you've dealt with like the worst. And I am also a survivor of sexual assault. So when I heard your story, I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine. Number one, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that. And I saw that you got to work with RAINN, and I've actually done some mutual stuff with RAINN too, and they are incredible. Yeah, RAINN, shout out RAINN, you're amazing. So if you don't mind, and if you're comfortable, would you mind sharing what happened with you?
Yes, well, just to give just a little tip, and then I'll come back to this. But last week, I actually gave a victim statement to the Montreal police because it took me 2 years to record that statement after I filed it. And because I had abuses not only in my acrobatic gymnastics career as a little girl, but then I also had them as an adult female circus performer in the circus world. So I was assaulted and molested and raped when I was a little girl by my coach, David Reiakvam. And then as an adult circus performer, which sexual harassment and sexual assault and abuse is rife in the circus world as well, I was assaulted and abused by my circus duo partner, my performance partner. So it's been a really long road, like kind of like bridging those gaps. And so I'll start from the beginning. When I was little, I unfortunately, one of my coaches, I had all of my coaches were exceptional and amazing except for one. And that's the most unfortunate thing, because it just takes one person to do so much damage and to set you back and to ruin and devastate your life. And so unfortunately, I was living with my coaches. I moved from home when I was 14 to have higher elite level training at a very popular gym. And this is a gym that I had known since I was a little girl. So I knew my next stage coaches since I was about 8 years old. I was familiar. I had stayed at their house. They knew my family. We were very well connected. They were very close friends with my previous coach. And the reason why I wasn't with my first coach anymore is because he had tragically died very young of lung cancer. So we made it through like that trial and tribulation. And so the fact that I not just only trusted them, I was very much loved what we thought by them. And this was a very normal thing to do, which was go and like live with your coaches. This is not normal anymore. This does not happen anymore in the USA Gymnastics world, but it was very normal when I was little. It's not something I would have my own kid do, but I understood what my parents were coming from. They really wanted me to have the best opportunities, and they did what they could. So I lived with my coaches in Southern California. I'm originally from Northern California. I'm from San Jose, and I would live with my coaches during the week. and I would fly home to San Jose on the weekend to see my family. And then Mondays would come back around and I'd fly back. And what came to be about is the reason why they were having so many little girls live with them over many, many years is that my coach, David Reiakvam, was a serial predator and pedophile. And so he would come into my room every single morning and rape and molest me. And then I would go to the gym. I would just go to training. And all the while his wife and their little baby at the time would just be sleeping down the hall. And this was his MO. And this lasted for 6 months, almost, yes, a bit over 6 months before things kind of imploded. And it turned out that he had been molesting and raping one of my other teammates, although he was not convicted or even reported to the police by USA Gymnastics once they discovered that. He was not even banned from coaching in the sport. He was just stripped of his titles as national team coach or world team coach at that time. So even the parents in the gym did not want to report him. And at that time, they didn't want to report him. The gym did not report him. Her parents did not report him. This is very normal within the youth sports gymnastics world, in the USA Gymnastics world. This is very normal at that time. But yeah, it's literally outrageous. And so I didn't tell anyone about my abuses. Of course, he continued to stalk me. He continued to abuse me. I ended up moving out of their home because they got a divorce. So that's the only reason why he lost access to me. He tried very hard to gain access to me over that time, but I at least got freed from it after a certain amount of time. But it took me until the police kind of knocked on my door almost 10 years later. And it had been discovered that he was using his 11-year-old son's Facebook account to prey on young girls and groom them, and in hopes of raping them and molesting them. And so he hadn't stopped. And we knew that there were so many of us, and that was the point where it finally hit me, because I was still so brainwashed. I still had contact with him a little bit on and off until being an adult. All of us had, he was so, he had such a hold on us. There was so much brainwashing going on. So I hadn't spoken to him at that point for probably about 2 years when the police asked me if I would go undercover and speak with them and call him basically to try to get like a recorded confession. And I speak about how that's like the scariest thing I've ever had to do in my life, and I think the scariest thing I'll ever have to do in my entire life, because I was literally just like terrified. I got coached by the detectives and to speak with him, because I just kept thinking, like, what is he gonna think if I just call him out of the blue? And they were like, he's gonna be happy. And so, they were like, you're just going to go into that particular mindset that he speaks on. And unfortunately, for kids that have been like molested and raped, we have a consciousness that we understand what they're talking about. We understand that dynamic. I like to stay away from the word relationship, because we know that, to dull sexual assault and abuse, people say they had a relationship with the 12-year-old, or they had a relationship with a 14-year-old, a relationship with a 16-year-old. So I try and stay away from that, because, they were raping a 14-year-old, raping a 15-year-old, raping a 16-year-old. So I spoke with him for like an hour or so and was able to secure that confession. I had the police there telling me on paper what things he needed to say, how to keep goading him on the phone, and it took us 2 years of continuances with his trial, but he was eventually convicted. Unfortunately, the DA pled him down immensely, and just to kind of bring this back around of how like your color intersects with your victimization. The DA told me that she didn't want to go to trial because my coach was white, very attractive, a doctor, had a lot of money, was very influential, and it was going to be very difficult for a jury of his peers to want to convict him as the serial pedophile and rapist that he was. And so instead of serving like a minimum of 20 years for all the things he did to me and my former teammate Amy Agnon, who was also very, very brave, it took her a very long time, but once she finally came on board with the case, It was amazing. We didn't have everybody. All the victims did not want to come forward and participate in the case, so that was also very difficult. Because it would have made things powerful, even more powerful in a way. But we know that, like, it was what it was. I understand, and I have so much compassion because I don't blame anyone for my experiences from not coming forward. I tell everybody I understand if you never say a thing. If you at least identify it and you get healing, you get help, but I understand if you never seek things through the criminal justice system because it is so brutal. So he was sentenced. He's a registered sex offender, and he only got 2 years. He served 1 for good behavior. It was that's still difficult. I'm still trying to deal with that aspect. I mean, he lost his license, so he can never practice medicine again. But in terms of literally like what he did, because it also nullified what people thought that he did. Of course, we were victim shamed within the gymnastics community. We were ostracized. People thought that we were lying. I got left out of all sorts of things. Even though, like, I'm like honorary this or that. People didn't want to hear from me. They didn't want to include me in things. I was contacting all sorts of people during that time, and everybody ignored me. This is all before Nassar happened, and that whole thing ended up coming about, which was so powerful. So this was before that conversation developed, and we found out that I knew it was systematic. I mean, I know how rampant sexual abuse is within sports, gymnastics, and acrobatics and USAG. We were all, people talk amongst themselves in a lot of different ways, and children do, because again, we were all children during those times. But as I got older, being around people, everybody would reveal a lot of different things that happened to them and crimes that were inflicted upon them in competition and by their coaches and things. So it's something that has very much shaped my life. I'm right now in bankruptcy court against USA Gymnastics. This is almost 10 years post my coach's conviction.
10 years.
It's almost 10 years since he was convicted and served time in prison. So I'm still.
Oh, it gave me chills. That makes me so upset. Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah. It's so slow and so hard, and we actually lost our ability to file civil suits against him and USA Gymnastics because when we were having our case, the conversation wasn't there. So I went to the Gloria Allred firm, and I was trying to get representation, but it just wasn't there. People just didn't get it. They didn't know what they were potentially getting into because people don't know anything about gymnastics. They don't know anything about our world. So it was just so kind of like outside of their scope that they didn't understand just how culpable the USA Gymnastics machine was for all of these pedophiles just continuing to be delinquent. It's an environment that breeds predators, that breeds pedophiles, and the environment is incredibly sick. And so I want to take it from that environment to the circus environment because they're pretty much one and the same. The only thing is that you're dealing with more minors, and then in the adult realm, obviously, everyone's quote unquote professional. But the environment is very similar. It's very brainwashed. No one says anything. You can get away with almost anything that you want to. And back to that also too. Even when I was going through when we had like our victim impact statement, people were still sending their children they sent their children to support my coach at his sentencing. So this is how committed the environment is to supporting the abusers and not the victims. They sent their children, and they're still willing to send their children if he wanted to be a coach. They'd still be willing to have their children be coached by a man that was raping and molesting for the better part of 20 years. So it's a very, very deep thing. When people are like, we need to stop talking about this, and it's not that bad, and everybody move on. I think I'll never get over the fact that people are willing to send their children to people that they know.
Monsters.
Yeah, to convicted monsters, people that have served time in prison. I don't think any of us could really ever rationalize that, but I've been in around that so long that I understand how that works because yeah, I've seen it happen so much, and it still continues. Even with all this conversation that we have out here, people are still sympathetic to really vicious, awful, terrible people that have ruined. They ruined all of our lives. They ruined our lives. We were able to get a lot of them back. I feel bad to put my headphones in.
You're fine. You're fine. I mean, if you think that will help, that's a-okay. Whatever you're comfortable with, I will try my best to fix. So.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize.
Okay. So yeah. So at the time that I, going into circus and not getting like the treatment that I needed to have for like myself, because that came around for me, much later. I was 24, 25 when everything happened around my coach, and I was so vulnerable to predators, and didn't realize that until I got into the therapy that I needed. And that's also a very difficult thing, is like as a victim, to get the therapy you need while traveling all over the world with circus, going in so many environments and never being tethered to one place has been really hard for me to get the help that I needed over many years. So it's taken a long time for me to get access and get consistent access. But I ended up being, just incredibly vulnerable, as we know that if you're abused when you're a kid, that the chances of you being abused as an adult are so high and so great. And, those are things that I just didn't know. Nobody told me. I mean, even after my case, people were like, "You're healed. You're a survivor. Like, you're brave. It's over."
No, it's not.
No, and
It never leaves you.
it never leaves you. And so I walked into all sorts of environments where people took so much advantage of me. And in circus, people take so much advantage of you. There's no rules in circus. You can do anything. People, they're artists, so everybody's very in love with being an artist. And it's unfortunately a very infantilized environment where people try to, they excuse everything in the name of art, just like you excuse everything in the name of getting that gold Olympic medal, right? So anything that you want to use to pacify the toxicity of that environment, you'll use. And so that's basically what people do in circus. But, it turned into an even, I think, kind of even more tragedy in my life to have that inflicted upon me when I was seeking justice, because when I was getting justice against my coach, that's when I had my abusive partnership, my circus duo partnership that was abusive. So it was also very difficult for me to kind of rationalize how both of those were happening at the same time. I mean, who would have thought, that both of those things would be happening at the exact same time? And I was with somebody, who was very similar. So it wasn't so surprising if you think about it, because they were very similar type of people, abusers and predators. They're very similar personality, very similar words that they even use. I mean, all those things down to a T are so consistent. And unfortunately, since I experienced all those things, like, I learned so much about, like, how all of that kind of interweaves together, and just like the makeup of somebody who comes from that space. But yeah, it was. I ended up being sexually assaulted several times by my circus duo partner. I had other circus duo partnerships that were not abusive, just to let everybody know, that were not, that were very healthy. So I did know the difference, because, sometimes I'm asked, like, "Oh, I mean, did you have something kind of to compare it to?" And it's like, well, I think we know the difference. It was clear, it was clear, even if I didn't have anything to kind of match it or, base it off of. But he was incredibly physically abusive to me, verbally abusive to me, sexually abusive to me. And we're finding out even now within the circus world that conversation has opened up as well. And, everybody's sharing their stories. And I know that my story isn't unique, but I'm getting to see even more now just how really not unique it is in circus. And so it's been a very difficult thing, obviously, too, because I was traveling around with him and I had to file reports in different countries. So navigating kind of like the international criminal justice system has not been easy. It took me a very long time to file those reports because only one of the incidences and assaults happened in America. And the other ones, I wasn't in my home, country of origin. So there's like a very complex conversation in and around, how you get help. and how that is, how this environment, works for the predator, how they know that they're going to get away from that. It's very isolated. I was traveling all over the world with somebody that I didn't know super, super well, but I was with them for the work, and that's very common in circus. And people watch you be abused all the time in circus. I've watched people be abused for years in circus and nobody says anything. They just say that that person's passionate, or that's just the way that it is, or nobody steps in. The companies don't do anything. You hear these terrible stories. And in one of my podcast episodes, I told the story of a former colleague of mine who actually last year was murdered allegedly by her ex-boyfriend that she was still performing with. And it just rocked me. It rocked all of us. But it really, really, really rocked the circus world, because her story was so everything that we've all experienced in circus. Like the fact they were still working together, but that they weren't together. The fact that everybody knew about all these different aspects of their relationship that were so bad, but nobody intervened. And she was performing still on her own, and he was able to catch her because she went to travel by herself to a show. And at that moment, that's when he caught her and kidnapped her and then murdered her shortly after. And her name was Ola Klishtan. She was a Ukrainian, and she was a very strong-willed woman. Her personality was everything that I'm not. I'm very smiley and very, just naturally. And she was everything that people would say would not happen to someone like her, and it happened. And it happened. And I've been saying this in the circus world for a very long time too, but it's hard to get people to listen to you, and people started listening more when that happened to her, because to me, I kept telling them, every person here is vulnerable, every woman is vulnerable, every artist is vulnerable to that kind of situation. And myself traveling around, because I stopped working with a partner after I was assaulted and abused by my former partner, I decided I'll never work with a partner again. It's too dangerous. But I want to keep my job. I almost left circus after being abused so badly by my partner. I was going to just completely change careers because it affected my mental health so deeply, and I was so traumatized. And didn't think that I could even manage being out in the world by myself and being vulnerable to all the other predatory people in circus, because it's just so prevalent.
Wow. I cannot imagine. I mean, just that industry being so small, and the fact that you mentioned that a lot of people don't understand that that goes on. I mean, people go and they watch the performers, and then that's kind of where their experience ends, and they don't think about what's actually going on. And I mean, that's devastating. And God rest her soul. That's just, I can't. And I'm so sorry you have to deal with this. I mean, to this day, I'm sure you still struggle with, PTSD from those experiences. How have you kind of recovered? Have you, I guess, is an even better question.
Thank you. And yes, I know. And just bless her again, because she just, I just, yeah, it was, her death affected me so deeply. I just could not imagine somebody killing her. It's just so different when you know someone, and we would talk on and off online, and I just hadn't spoken to her in a while, and then the next thing I knew, that's the information I was getting about her. So it was so, and it just made me, I kept telling everybody that could have been me. It literally could have been me. He was that abusive and that crazy. And for anybody to say, but would he really have taken it that far? And you say, well, I don't know. I haven't experienced it yet. I don't know. I'm still breathing. So I'm not really sure. But, would I have thought that her ex-boyfriend, that I knew them together, would have done that eventually? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. For it to go that far. So it's been a journey to health. I'm sure you're familiar with that new recently the advocate. Her name is Daisy, and she was the founder of Safe Bay. And she was so young, like you, Makaila, and she was a survivor, and she made it through so much. And she recently committed suicide. And there was a really powerful article that talked about the myth of the survivor. And that really hit me hard. I think it hit all of us hard because, you know, I know that we've switched the dialogue from victim to survivor, and that's happened over the course of like my cases and my journeys. And I think that it's more about like surviving, surviving, because I've had to change the course of my treatment and things many times. And I feel like it's a job and it's a responsibility to myself that's kind of like never done. And sometimes a lot of it, you're going through things not with a lot of people there that can continuously support you on these journeys, especially in the criminal justice system, when you don't know how long these things are going to take. It's a big burden on yourself. It's a burden on your family, on your friends. But I've done, I finally got the right therapist. I went to a lot of like non-helpful therapy for a long time, and also too, just like with technology finally like raising up to support my lifestyle, I would have to say has helped tremendously, because there was many years that I couldn't get the treatment I needed just because there was no access. I started off doing like Skype treatments, but there are so many treatments that you need to do in person to get towards the root of that complex trauma. And so that's been a difficult journey, you know, being traveling on tour for, you know, like yearly. I mean, this is the first time I've been in one space, like actually in America. This is the longest I've been in America in years. So ironically enough, I can't even see, you know, my therapist in person. So I'm still seeing her in telemedicine, you know. So
yeah. It's a weird time, and especially to be dealing with what you're dealing with and not being able to go in person. I mean, you can talk with someone, you know, on this, and it's like it's not the same.
It's not the same. And, you know, there's a lot of therapy that I think has failed a lot of us survivors. I've experienced a lot of it. So I've really done like a lot of my own like due diligence to try and continue to find things that serve me. I think therapy is different for everyone. And like, you know, some people need groups, some people need one-on-one. You know, there's a lot of things. I've found some kind of formulas that work for me in certain ways, but I obviously have to continue to reassess, because there's things that trigger me that I just, you know, I think that I'm done or I'm through with that. And obviously with certain things taking years to come back around, there is the thing where it's like a continuous trigger, and then it triggers you in different ways because you're a different person. You're a different, you know, you have a different perspective now. And sometimes the perspective as you get older makes it worse. You know, sometimes the more you start to know and the more you start to live and the more you start to feel just even more compassion for that aspect of yourself that had those experiences. But, you know, I was incredibly triggered last week. And that took me out for a couple of days. It really did. You know, speaking with the detective, at least it was a woman. So that was in some ways a little bit, I got a little lucky on that. But the language around that and, you know, going through that process and re-experiencing those things. And of course, this many years later, it brings all those things back up. And so for me, I had to really double down on my self-care and not even on self-care. Again, I don't want to make light of that. I do a lot of very serious things to make sure that I preserve my capacity to function and to thrive as like a full-fledged like human being. And some days you're just like not there, and some things you just like cannot make it through for a minute. And I think that that's okay to just like recognize that, like we're leaving that for tomorrow or next week. Like you don't have to do everything all at once, because it will really just take over your life. And you want to have like a life. You want to have a beautiful life. And I've really
not let it define you.
I'm sorry.
No, not to interrupt you. I was just saying, and like, yeah, not let it define you, because it can feel like that happened to me. It's how you react, and, you know, and how we recover is the important part.
Yes. Because we want to have a beautiful life. We don't want to have a traumatized life.
No.
You know, it's so hard to be traumatized. I mean, you know, sometimes people see me and they think like, well, God, she's just so light and she's so this. It's like, yeah, but that's the point. I mean, that's the point You deserve to have a happy life. Like, you're not
Mhm.
go through all these things and go through all these therapies just so that you can stay in what they did to you, so that you can stay in the misery that somebody perpetuated against you, in the way that they tried to destroy and murder your life. You're not supposed to stay there. Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's the whole point. We're supposed to get back to that source, or go forward, because you're never going to be maybe that person that you were before too, and that's okay. Like, I've done things where I've had like little ceremonies of like little funerals for the person that I never was. Like, those are things that I've done that have been very helpful and informative. I've done a lot of therapy where we've done a lot of kind of ritual to kind of acquiesce or release the things that will never be and never were, because you're just starting with a clean slate. And I think that's also too something that's really powerful to remember. Like, you can begin again. Even if you get justice and even if you don't, because also dealing with the fact that I got a certain level of justice, which I'm grateful for, because I work in a lot of countries where women don't even have the right to do such things. Children don't even have the right to do such things. So that's never lost on me as like a Western woman, that I have access and right to that. However, we're still so far behind, and we have so far to go, because like what last week made me feel like people don't care about sexual assault victims and they don't care about women. That was my initial takeaway. And then I have to come back. You have to ground again, and come back, to yourself. Remind yourself, I'm advocating for myself. I am my best advocate. And you always just have to be fighting for yourself. Most of these things wouldn't happen if I wasn't willing to keep on doing them. But I'm not going to do them without trying to make sure that I have as much support as I actually have access to. So I just think it's just so important to just like reach out and just get any level of support you can in any way, and never let it go, and keep on changing it up to work for you and figuring it out. But I think there's another conversation around, like, again, so many victims don't get any justice, and I'm dealing with that now in terms of, my circus duo partner, the one that abused me, is very famous. He's very well known in the circus industry. People just like love, his act, and people still message me about it, and I got like blacklisted from jobs for not working with him anymore, and so many things happened against me from escaping him, and he just continued to fill up and do well, and he has a family, and he has kids now. He's all these things that I want, that because of all the traumas and things that I've been through, have made it a very bumpy road for me to have those things. And so, I pray that I get access to those things, but it's just like nothing about his life stopped. Nothing. It just continued. It got better. And even the people that know about him, because people know so many things about him, they just allow it, and he just continues to go in those circles, and they call him a genius, and, kind of like fawn all over him. So, like I said, people message me thinking that I'm still working with him, so I get all of this information about him that's unwanted, but it comes to me because people think that we're maybe still working together. So there's, a lot of things, and that's why I'm trying to speak out loud now as much as I possibly can, because I say, what other forms of justice can we get here? Because I know it's not just me, and I think it's very important for people to know about him and to know about what he did and what he's capable of. And as we know, predators in that way never really stop their business. So
Yeah, they never change. God, well, I am so sorry that I know I keep apologizing. I know it's such a I like don't know what else to say, but I am proud of you from, for me it was so difficult, and like you said, the guy that abused me, his life just kept going, and he just got engaged, and I sit back and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm in a loving relationship, and I'm so grateful for that. But like this guy just kept just going, and I'm like, what the hell? Like I believe in karma, and I have to, because I have to know that it's gonna come back and somehow get him some way. So I like that keeps me going. So I just that makes me sick that he just, because I know how you feel to a degree in that regard. It's just so
yeah.
keep using your voice. It's so powerful.
Thank you, Makaila. I'm going to continue and try, and I'm so sorry that happened to you too. I am so sorry. I just, from the depths of my being, I'm so, so, so sorry. And know that, we don't know when, but it happens. And I've told people this as well. The things that have come back into my life, how justice has come back around after years, right? in many spaces, at many times in my life, I would never have guessed, even something as awful as, Larry Nassar. If that would not have happened, it wouldn't have opened up other pathways for me to seek justice against USA Gymnastics. And I had to wait years for that. And there's things that I did years ago that I'm recycling, and people are like, that's so great that you're sharing that now. And I'm like, no, I shared it 4 years ago, but nobody read it. Listened, and nobody cared. So, that's painful. It's painful, but it's also shown me a lot too, that it doesn't mean that anybody has to do this. You can go and live your life. You don't have to advocate and do all those things. You don't have to do that. But if you stay just available and open, if that gives you a little bit of hope, like even this, conversation of Me Too and circus, I never thought that it would happen on the way that it's happening. And now my experience is being, looked at basically as like oh my God, like that is real. And everybody knows who that is. So, there's so many things that have come back around where I'm like, whoo, wow, yeah, okay, justice. Like, you never really know what it's going to look like, and justice comes in so many different forms, just like, karma. It comes in a lot of forms, and maybe you won't see it for a very long time, but at some point in your life, and I hope this for everyone, but I've lived it, so I can speak from it. I just have had experiences where I'm like, I would have never have thought that it would come around. As much as I prayed for justice to look a certain way, it's come around in a different way. And so it gives me peace and gives me hope, for others.
Well, you are so strong, and it's very, not that it's good to hear you're sharing your story, because I wish you had never gone through that, but I'm glad there's people like you who are not going to let it happen to other people, and you're going to advocate, and you're going to fight, and they can't get away with it. So thank you for all you're doing, on behalf of people like me. So.
Thank you, Makaila, and thank you for everything that you're doing and all the advocating and all the speaking that you're doing. And, I know that we're both doing this, yes, because we never want anyone to experience this again. Like, I never want any child to experience what I experienced. I never want anyone to be abused in their partnerships, whether it's in work or their personal life. Like, I never want anyone to go through the things that I have gone through. And I think that's really important to remind people when they feel a little bit like, okay, we've kind of had enough. And it's like, yeah, but do you want anyone to have that stain on their life that is in so many ways like like not fixable? Like,
yeah.
You just can't fix some of those things. Like, I would never want someone to have to bring themselves back to life like we have, to resuscitate like that life force. Like, never in a million years, and especially when it comes to children.
Yes.
That for me, it really does take it like way too far whenever I see anybody in any slight way apologetic in what is perpetuated against children in that form. Coming back to my own self, when you have to recognize, like, I was just a little kid, I was just a little girl, and reminding people of that, I think is so important, and it brings their connection back to why we speak and why we're not going to let it go, because we should never let it go. Because I like something that I've heard before where somebody said that, evil never takes the day off, so why should love?
Oh, goosebumps again. Woo!
Yeah, they're always ready and willing to perpetuate whatever evilness that they want to. They're always ready. Evil never sleeps. It never does. So we should never, love should never sleep, and love should never not speak so loud. It just really shouldn't. But I thank you for having me here, Makaila, on your show, and for speaking about my experiences, and for holding such an open space for me to share. Yeah, It's always a very powerful thing, and I think it's. I was speaking with a fellow survivor not that long ago, and she spoke about the power of speaking your story 20 times, and I really like. I love that in terms of like a metaphor for healing and how that helps you to like access the power of your healing and yeah, advocating for yourself. So.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, and keep advocating. And I'm here if you ever need to chat, or just whatever I can do to help you, ever. So I mean that.
Thank you so much, Makaila, and I'm looking forward to inviting you on my show. Be bold, be you, and be blatantly honest.